having enduring faith means you went through something that you had to endure. And everybody, they want great faith. I hear people want to be used by God. But when you get used, it hurts. But what a message. Wow. We just need an altar call right now. Got to get my thoughts together here. Well, first I want to say thank you to Brother Fuller for this opportunity to share our story. And it is our story. It's not just mine. And our involves this church. It involves all of my family and all of my friends and everyone who knows a little about what we've been through. Some people here probably don't even know anything about what we've been through. So I kind of need to lay a little bit of a foundation first.
This is John Sacker. I am Sallie Sacker.
Yeah. And we are going to do this very casually. Last night when we were praying together, we thought, what is the best way to present a very difficult story that we've lived through and to show you kind of the dynamic and how we got through it. And there's many more people that probably should be up on stage. They're not. So everything we say is thank you to everyone who has been part of this story. We wouldn't be here without prayer and support and the love of family, friends, and of course the church. And I want to start, once this phone starts up, with...
We made notes about our life.
Yeah, well, it's a long story. Brother Fuller asked me Monday to talk about this story and tell our testimony. And I said, okay, I'm 37 years old. This is a 37-year-long story. It's a very long story. So how... Yes.
So we're having lunch brought in.
Yeah, we're going to be here for a couple of hours. We will hurry through. So I want to give you a background of my life. I have cystic fibrosis. That is the underlying issue that has pretty much sent us through a whirlwind of insane stories. Cystic fibrosis, for those who don't know, is a genetic disease that mostly affects the lung and intestines, but also the pancreas, liver, and kidneys. Long-term issues include lung infections, malnutrition, malabsorption, diabetes, and various other life-altering problems. The average life expectancy is between 42 years to 50 years in countries like the United States. Chronic lung problems are responsible for death in 80% of people with CF. There is no cure for cystic fibrosis. The main signs and symptoms of cystic fibrosis are salty-tasting skin. I know that sounds funny, but that's important to point out. I'm sure she's going to chime in here for a second.
His mom told me that one of the ways that they diagnosed him was there was a lady that kissed his forehead. She was a doctor, and then she licked her lips, and she could taste all the salt, and that's one of the ways that they found out that he had CF.
Yeah. So there's that. Poor growth, poor weight gain despite normal or extreme food intake. Accumulation of thick, sticky mucus, which leads to frequent chest infections, and an inordinate amount of coughing and shortness of breath. Lung disease results from clogging of the airways due to the mucus buildup. Decreased ability to clear the airways and resulting inflammation cause these infections. This causes injury and structural changes to the lungs. In early stages, incessant coughing, overproduction of phlegm, and decreased ability to exercise are common. Many of these symptoms occur when bacteria that normally inhabit the thick mucus grow out of control and cause pneumonia. In later stages of the cystic fibrosis, changes in the architecture of the lungs take place in the major airways, destroying the way we normally breathe. This leads to oxygen deprivation. Airway pressure machines such as the BiPAP can help stop these things, and eventually ventilators are many times needed. Ultimately, at the end stage, there's only one option, which is either transplantation or pain medication to help you pass on to the next life. I will tell you that many people with CF do not make it this long. They don't even make it into their teenage years. It is an extremely serious disease. And so while we present it casually, don't mistake that we have dealt with something very serious. And as we share this story, the seriousness of the situation is not more serious than our God can handle. When I was a kid, and I'm going to go through these parts really quick.
And I think we have a picture of him as a kid. Anybody want to see John as a kid?
Yes, we have a picture. There it is.
Aww. And the other person is his cousin
My cousin Aaron.
That's Karen and Tommy's, his aunt and uncle's son.
So on your right, that's me. And on my left is Aaron. My aunt and uncle actually are here. This is Tommy and Karen. So we have a lot of family here today. When I was a kid, I actually did really well as a CF person. Most people end up in the hospital a lot. Most people don't make it to teenage years. But the things that I dealt with were constant coughing, constant battles with gaining weight. I was always smaller. I was always skinnier. I was always tired from this coughing. I remember the season changes were ultimately the worst because there could be 4 to 5 to 6 days in a row where I didn't sleep at all because I would cough nonstop. I would have to sit up in the bed to just try to get comfortable. Now, luckily, and by the blessing of God, I really wasn't struggling with breathing at that stage, but I did miss a lot of school. I did miss a lot of things that probably ordinary children didn't miss out on as much, but I really can't complain because I was able to play sports when I wanted to. I was able to go outside, even though some of the doctors thought we were crazy for letting me roll around in the grass, which were things I was allergic to.
He had a really cool mom.
Yeah, I did. And she got some slack for that from doctors. You know, they said, you need to do these things. And she said, well, we're seeing this other stuff work too. So it was a battle. It was a struggle. And I got to tell you, my mom and my parents, I was blessed. There were parents that couldn't handle someone with cystic fibrosis. There were many kids that were left at the doorstep of a hospital, or like any other children. When there's a disease or a problem, some parents aren't up to the task. I'm not downing them. I'm just saying that's just the way it is. My parents were up to the task, and that's a God thing because that doesn't always happen. And they were very diligent about therapy. Therapy was really the theme of my life when I was a kid. It was breathing treatments to relieve the restriction and the problems of not being able to breathe. And then the next step would be doing therapy of some kind of chest physical therapy. Now, in the old days, which is not that long ago, it was just cupping your hand and hitting your chest. Basically, she beat the snot out of me, literally.
She had an excuse. It was great.
Yeah, and so, she was upset that, no, I'm just kidding, she didn't do that. But what we did was took an ironing board, and we tilted it about a 30-degree angle. One top was on the sofa, and the other top was on the ground. Tilt me upside down with my head facing down to the ground, and she'd just start whacking away, trying to dislodge the mucus that's there, because that's what had the bacteria and the infections caught in this thick, sticky mucus. And it just was not able to be cleared normally. Everyone in here can cough usually well. Not everyone. I know there's some people that have health problems here, but most people can cough that out. But CF, it's too thick, the airways are too restricted, and you just can't get it out normally. So you spend a lot of time with chest compression. The next thing would have been an inhaled antibiotic to try to battle the infection. And that was often prescribed as 4 times a day. The time it could take could be anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how you felt, how serious we were really going to follow it. I fought her every single day. I was a child. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go outside. I wanted to be out in the sun. I wanted to do fun things and not be upside down on this board and let her beat me. And it wasn't just her. My dad was involved in this too. He even created a song. You had to do everything you could to get a kid to do this. He would create this crazy song, and I just remembered this. I'm going to sing this crazy song. He'd say, therapy number 1, therapy number 2, John David is so good, and I'd be laughing by this time. He's beating me, right? And he'd say, chicken don't know what to do, or something, It'd be some random animal, raccoon don't know what to do. And it was anything they could do to get me to do therapy. I had great parents. I was seriously blessed. I know people who had no problems, and their parents were nowhere. I was seriously blessed with great parents. And my mom's here, so she heard me say that. So moving on to the teenage years, really, pre-adolescence is one way, but post-adolescence is completely different. It becomes much more difficult. And I met this wonderful woman at age 16. That's us. I actually think I might have been 17 there.
We don't look like that anymore.
No, we don't look like that. So we met in high school, we went to Westmore. We lived in Moore. And
I thought he was so cute. Oh.
I'm not going to say what I thought. So, at age 16, I met a wonderful girl, but I also went in the hospital for the first time. Hospitalizations for CF people are very normal, and they're actually just considered maintenance. It's kind of like taking a car to the garage and having it fixed. You take the kid to the hospital, and you have them fixed. What happens is the infection just flares up out of control. And so at some point, your lung function starts to deteriorate, you're coughing nonstop, you're really tired, you're really sick, you're running fever, all of these things that are normal with infections, and you go to the hospital for a 2-week session. Now, 2 weeks is a long time. It just is. When you think about in a hospital for 2 weeks and you can't leave, you're on IVs sometimes 24 hours a day for both the infections in the lungs and also an IV for possible nutrition so that you can gain weight while you're there because you're always battling that. And that was I remember the very first time I went in the hospital. It was a life-altering event because I hadn't had that before that. I knew people did it, but I just really didn't understand everything that went into this. I didn't realize all of the details that it takes in this hospital for this 2-week session. And as I got older into my college years, it wasn't just once a year. It was 2, 3, and 4 times a year. And then when we got married in 2004.
That's 6 years, y'all. 6 years.
She's talking about dating. This is what we didn't want to talk about, Lucas, with the youth, 6 years.
Yeah, you all have to wait 6 years before you get married.
There's a lot of stories there we could tell. We're going to move on.
He's going to move on.
Yes, so we married in 2004, and I was in the hospital.
Our first year of marriage, he was in the hospital 10 times. We spent our first Christmas in the hospital. One thing that you learn is that holidays are just a day. You can celebrate them anytime. So that's something that you have to learn when you are spending all your holidays in a hospital instead of at home with everybody else.
So I was in the hospital around 8 to 10 times in 2004. By 2005, I had to quit work.
Those 2 weeks, our car got stolen. My temporary job ended, and his doctor told him that he could no longer work. That was our first year of marriage.
That was our first year.
Woo!
So it was super easy,
Everybody says the first year's the hardest.
Yeah, I don't know what they're talking about. So, and I remember when I found out she had lost her job, I was in the hospital. I was literally in the hospital, and they told me, you really need to stop working. You really need to maybe go on disability. And I thought, what are we going to do?
I got me a job.
And she got a job as a temp job. And then and God had his hand on all of that. Moving on, because we're trying to go pretty quick.
Sorry, we'll hurry.
2005 to 2008, I was in the hospital sometimes 14 times a year. Now, that's 2 weeks at a time.
He didn't work during that time.
That's 14 times 2 is 28.
2 weeks minimum.
That's a minimum on IVs. That's more than half a year. So the total amount of time I've probably spent on IVs or in the hospital it's probably been about 7 years of my life.
And I'll add that it was a hospital in Tulsa, so I was traveling back and forth, and his mom stayed with him many times.
This is why she's up here, because I can't remember all of this. And it helps these little details to come out, because I really have no memory. I've done so much medicine. I've done so much drugs.
That's what I was going to say. He's done so many drugs that he can't remember.
This doesn't really work well. And when it does, sometimes my stories are totally wrong. They're out of line. They're out of context. They're not even in time. It's insane. So this is my manager.
I'm his memory.
So we go on to see that my lung function is deteriorating. So in college, we saw my lung function maybe drop to around 75. And I need to talk about lung function quickly so you can get a reference of what I'm really meaning. So everyone in here, mostly, except those that have some health issues, are probably breathing at around 80 to 100% efficiency. Some may be lower just because of age. Some may be lower due to health issues. But most people who don't have any problems are going to be breathing around 80 to 100%. In college, high school to college, I saw it drop from 80 to 70 to 60. When we got married, moving on in the 2005 to 2008 times, we saw it drop to 50, saw it drop to 45. And I hit a plateau at 45 in 2008. And I was there until 2012. I don't know why. I cannot explain to you. We saw it dropping, then it's just stopped. I do attribute that to God. I really do. And I err on the side of that because I can't tell you that it was. God never showed him and said, I'm going to stop this and make it stop. I gave him the glory anyway. Because what's it going to hurt, right? God's awesome. And
he has his hand in everything.
He does. He has his hand is everything. And so I went back to work in 2008, all the way until 2011.
At 45%.
At 45%. And that is actually, during that time, we were youth pastoring here, actually. And so we'd take these crazy kids to North American Youth Congress, and I'd be on oxygen. I remember the last time we went was in 2011, and we had a group of kids that drove me insane. And then we
took his oxygen machine that's on rollers with us so that he could have oxygen while he was there, because he was on oxygen at the time.
And after the service, I'd come, and I would immediately rush to the hotel room after we made sure all the kids weren't doing something stupid, and throw the mask on and try to breathe and make sure we can get through the next day.
Thank God for Amy, because she helped us, and she was the one that stayed with the kids.
She dealt with a lot of the people. So by 2011, though, we saw a pretty heavy drop. I dropped into the 30s range, and at 35%, it's considered transplant status. And at that point, you really need to consider it. We really hadn't considered it, honestly. We'd had discussions with the doctor, but I was not on the transplant list. I really wasn't planning for this. I was still praying. I was still, God's going to do it. I was still believing God's going to do this. And in 2011, I had to go on 24 hours continuous oxygen. I had to go on what they call a BiPAP machine.
I don't know if anyone knows what a BiPAP machine is. A lot of people use it at night to help them sleep, which he had used it every night anyway. But this time he needed 24 hours of BiPAP with oxygen, and it's kind of like a ventilator almost. It's a very mild form of ventilator that helps him breathe. It literally pushes air into his lungs to help him breathe.
And we lived that way for quite a few months. I could not even walk across the room for fear of passing out due to low oxygen. Life came to a very, very quick halt.
Will you show the lungs again?
Go back one, please. Yeah.
That's what his lungs look like.
Not a normal set of lungs, by the way. That looks like, I don't know, like a chicken fried steak or something. But that's not what they should look like. But this is what my lungs looked like by 2012. They had gone from the nice pink, pretty color to that. And in 2012, I found myself, again, going into the hospital in May for another 2-week regular session, which is what we thought. And by May 18th, everything was very different. This is where she comes in. Because I was
Dr.
asleep.
Reyes took his mom and I out in the hallway of the pediatric floor, because that's where CF kids go, no matter what age. And he told us that he had 3 to 4 days to live without a transplant. He had been on the transplant list for 6 days, and that is not a long time to be on the list. I don't really remember what I did. I felt really mad at Dr. Reyes, and he's a really nice doctor. I remember I called some of John's friends. I remember I called Stephen Dearman, Scylla's brother, and I told him that John was dying, and I called my parents, and I just prayed. His mom and I prayed a lot. I walked up and down the peds hall praying. I didn't care who heard me. I remember one time I went into an empty peds room, which you're not supposed to do because they're sterilized, and I got on the ground and I prayed. Thank God it was sterilized. And on the 20th, I was in the waiting room with a bunch of people, and many people came to see us. And I watched the doctors hurriedly walk by, and I ran after them because I didn't know it wasn't their normal round time. And they came in and they said, "We have a set of lungs. It is a minor that was found in their car with a needle in their arm. They had overdosed. These lungs will not go to anyone else if you say no. They are high-risk lungs. We have no idea what was on the needle and no way to test it. So there is a risk there. Do you want them? This guy said no.
And I said no. Now, I've got to point something out very, very clearly. She's up here because I have zero memory of what she's talking about. Now, people tell me I was talking, that I was coherent, and they really didn't understand. I do not have a single memory of this. They say I signed papers, everything. I said no, I was declining lungs. But it was more of this almost like on an autopilot, just, no, I guess we won't.
He's like, I think we'll wait. I was like, everybody get out of the room. I got to tell Johnny's dying.
And she did. She took over.
I said, honey, you are dying, and these lungs are the ones that God provided. We need to say yes. Oh, yeah, we should say yes then. All right.
Autopilot.
So we said yes, and the surgery was at 7 p.m., and we had 38 people with us in the waiting room. We walked in, and every party there had 1 to 3 people, and we walked in with 38, and it was awesome. They had this church had everybody signed up, and every 30 minutes there was someone in the chapel praying, and they all took turns, and I sat by the phone with Heather Durham doing a puzzle, because if I looked at anyone, I was going to burst into tears. So I did a puzzle to keep my mind busy, and every time the phone rang, it was pretty much for me to let me know he was doing okay. And he did. He did fine.
And we did fine.
God blessed that surgery because Dr. Canale.
He did amazing. It was a miracle that was unbelievable.
Dr. Canale actually, you saw those lungs? Those lungs are hard to cut out of a body. He nicked the aorta, and everything turned out fine.
Praise God. Yes, let's give him a hand clap of praise. Thank you, Jesus. James, there's a picture of skiing. Not that one. This one. This is life after transplant. This was 2013.
We went skiing, y'all.
This was February of 2013. A CF person went to 14,000 feet, skied. I had a lung function of over 90. It was incredible. I had never felt this way before, and I had coughed every day of my life, and now I coughed 0 days of my life, 0. In fact, I coughed so much. I got. So when you cough that much, you get a six-pack. That's pretty awesome, right? No lie.
Yeah.
It was awesome. Of course, I had no fat either, so there's that. After it, though, I had a 1-pack.
It's an ab.
Like everybody else. We went skiing. We had a wonderful time.
Adam Marshall was there.
Yes, he was. I think he actually got hurt. I don't remember.
He did.
We did a lot of things that summer. We traveled. We went to Florida. We went to Orlando. We really lived a life we had never lived before, even as married. I mean, we'd been married by this time, 9 years. And we had never had it like this. It was amazing. And we were thanking God, and we were worshiping God, and we were praising God all the time. And we see in the fall, my lung function starts to fall again.
He's coughing a lot.
And you want to talk about depressing. I mean, at that point, God's done something so amazing, and you're like, yeah, it's going to be good. We had zero expectation that it would ever be a problem again. We had even considered adoption. As a CF person, you cannot have biological children, and so we thought, you know what, we'll adopt. I'm going to be healthy forever. We were just planning this. And then I got sick again, and I started to have a decline in lung function again. I started having problems again. I started coughing a tiny bit again. It wasn't as much, but it was there. We started going to the doctor all the time. We're like, Doc, what's the deal? What's wrong here? Because we were frantic.
They couldn't tell us.
And they couldn't tell us a thing. And I ended up in the hospital again at the end of 2013 in December. I remember on the night before I was supposed to go in, it was like this hammer had just smashed our bodies to the ground. We were just heavy. We were just overcome with this. It was just frustration. It was confusion. Where's God in that? I mean, we prayed. We worshiped, we praised. You know, that's the weapons of our warfare anyway. We're using them all the time. And we believed, we had faith. But we find ourselves in the hospital again. I go in the hospital on December 4th of 2013. And somewhere along the line, I check out. That's why she's up here again, because I'm on a ventilator now, much worse than the first time. I'm on ventilator, I'm on life support.
So on December 13th, they moved him to ICU. They tried a BiPAP machine in the hospital. It didn't work, so they put him on a ventilator. It was really awful and terrible. They had him sedated, and they kept doing tests to find out what was wrong with him. They finally figured out that it was the rhinovirus, which is the common cold. Now you know why I'm a germaphobe, because the common cold destroyed his lungs. On Christmas Day,
2013.
They asked his mother and I if we wanted to turn off the machine. And I said no, because I had hope that he would get better, and his doctor kept saying that he would get better. So I said no, we're going to keep fighting and keep trying. It was a really hard Christmas, and I had many friends that came up. The DeBros came up, and they brought me the hardest puzzle in the world. And the only puzzle I never finished. And the stewards came up, and there were so many people, I can't even name them all. And they spent Christmas Day with us so that we wouldn't be alone. And then in January, his virus was gone, but his lungs were destroyed. They woke him up. They asked if he wanted a retransplant, and he said yes. But they don't do retransplants here in Oklahoma City. His surgeon, Dr. Canale, he was pretty up there in age, and he retired right after John's surgery. I think that John just made him retire.
Yeah, I finished him off, I'm sure.
So they had decided that we needed to go to a different facility, and we got med-flighted to Pittsburgh on February 13th in the tiniest jet I've ever been in. His mom and I
remember this night because it was so cold, and I was sedated, and I still remember this. This is one of the few things I actually know I remember. I was freezing. I could feel them jostling me around, and I felt them push me, and I felt, in my mind, and this is kind of tell you what I was experiencing a little bit, but I felt like they were pushing me in a box, and just like closing this box on top of me.
It felt like a box.
Coffin. That's what I got, so.
His mom and I had to crawl into this jet on our hands and knees. It was terrible, but he was strapped to a gurney on a ventilator with tons of tubes, everything in a jet. And we were med-flighted to Pittsburgh.
So we get to Pittsburgh, and this is sort of what we did last night. I told her I was going to ask a question. So what happens in Pittsburgh? We get there, and we've got this hope, right? I mean, that we're going to be saved. What happens in Pittsburgh?
They told us that he was too sick to have a transplant. His kidneys had started failing, and that was not disclosed to them. And we got there, and he was very swollen, and they said that he was too debilitated to have a transplant. So what did I say to the doctor? The doctor told me and Pamela this, and Joel was there, and said that he was too sick. And I looked at her, and I love Dr. Crespo now. I did not like her at this time. And I looked at Pamela, and I said, she does not know what she is talking about, and I don't believe her.
Every now and then, I love this part. Every now and then you have to be really stubborn with faith. There's going to be things that you are told in reality are absolutely impossible with man, with doctors. And I look at, she's up here for a reason. There's no way I'd be alive without someone like this, and without family, and without the support. But this person has this faith. She won't ever say this out loud, so I'll say it. It's a faith that says, I don't really care what you just said. I know you said the truth. I know you just told me reality, but my God lives way outside of that. And he has power to overcome facts and statistics and the things that we know we can't do, but he can, because nothing's impossible with God. Nothing at all. Nothing's even hard with God. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't feel that. So we went on, and so What happened next?
They have a meeting every week to evaluate possible transplant patients. And for some odd reason, they were under the impression that my husband was lazy and didn't do anything, and that's how he'd gotten sick. And no one says that about my husband. And I said, no, at this time, we were the college and career pastors at our church. We just did a 5K with Paulette Marshall in October.
And that's a picture right there.
That's John in the pink.
I am in that beautiful pink outfit. And we had just walked this 5K in September with Paulette Marshall and her team, October, and her team. And she does this every year. And I'm going to tell you, that was everything to these people. And this is where there was a lady named Diana Zaldonis. And this is where she comes into play.
So Diana Zaldonis is Dr. Bermudez's research assistant, and she's
Dr. Bermudez was the surgeon.
He's the head of cardiothoracic surgery in Pittsburgh. Dr. Diana is a runner, and I told her this. I was trying to explain, I was kind of frantic trying to explain, no, my husband is not lazy. No, we do things. We are active. This is what's made him lazy. He can't get up. And I told her that we had done the 5K, and she said, you did a 5K? And I said, yeah, I have pictures. And so I showed her all the pictures. She took my phone to the evaluation meeting, and they decided that they would transplant John if they could get the swelling down, if he could do this with his hands, and if he could wiggle his toes. Because that's all he could do.
All because of that.
All because of that one picture. Praise God for Paulette.
But seriously, if I hadn't gone to that, there's things we can start connecting that God has done, and he's been doing them forever. And there's plans he has in place. And yes, these may not be the will of God. It may not be the will of God to ever get sick, but he takes the bad things and he does good with them. And we couldn't have ever planned that, ever. So that changed their mind. So everybody's on board to do surgery now, but I'm too sick to have surgery still.
But guess what? His carbon dioxide level is too high to have a transplant. So the ICU doctor, we're here again, took his mom and I into a room, and the family doula was there. I don't remember who all was there. And the ICU doctor was very nice, and she was with her nurse, and she sat us down and said, we can start dialysis. It will bring his swelling down, but his carbon dioxide level is still too high to transplant, and right now we don't have the solution. You would put him through needless suffering. His mom and I looked at each other, and we had just about said, let's turn off the machine. And her phone rang, and it was Diana Zaldonis, and they had gotten emergent use approval from the FDA to use a machine that was manufactured and created in Pittsburgh, which is why we were there. And it was a machine that's never been used in the U.S. ever, and it was used in 20 other countries. It reduces carbon dioxide, and we had just gotten approval.
Amen. God's doing things. And
all the time.
It's weird, and it's confusing. And every time we hit a roadblock, it looked like the end, and it was, according to everybody we heard. And they were offline. They didn't want to do this. And every step we've worked, God's changing things. He's changing minds. He changed the mind of the FDA. That's impossible. They don't let you do anything without a lot of money, and it hadn't happened yet. But for some reason, when they asked to use this machine for me, even though they had been denied 13 times before, they allowed it for me. Who knows why? So enter A-Lung. The A-Lung is the company that creates the Hemalung, which is this little machine that removes carbon dioxide.
That's him hooked up to it.
But that's me hooked up to the Hemalung right now. So the problem, though, is it's manufactured here, but they can't sell it here in the United States. So there's no machines here.
Another hiccup. So we have approval. We have no machines in the United States at all, even though it's 5 miles from the hospital where it's made. So the CEO, Pete DiComo, drove all night long because they told us that John would not survive the night without being hooked up. So Pete drove all night long with a coworker into Canada to pick up a machine that they had created in Pittsburgh and shipped to Canada. They wanted to bring one back. So
they did not have papers. They did not have the correct anything to get across customs with this machine coming back in. And it stopped them. Now, for all intents and purposes, they should have been stopped right there, and this story should be done, and I should be dead. Because you don't bring foreign materials into the United States without proper documentation. But for some reason, Pete DeComo, he's the CEO, he told this story to this guy, and I know God right there just said, this is what's going to happen, you're going to let him through. Because there's no other reason this would have gotten through. And the guy said, well, I guess next time you should just have one in Pittsburgh. And he let him through. That's not supposed to happen. I hope the guy doesn't lose his job if somebody's watching us.
So they arrived at 8 a.m. with the hemolung. They hooked John up, and his carbon dioxide immediately started decreasing. So
that set me up for the actual transplant.
They did dialysis. They did the hemolung. We solved the carbon dioxide. We solved the swelling. He did this for Dr. Bermudez. And he wiggled his toes.
Something about that.
I don't know. So he was listed, and we were just waiting on lungs, which honestly is a very hard part because everything's in place, everything's ready, and you're just waiting. And that's very hard to do. He was on the hemolung for 18 days. Dr. Bermudez took us into a room and told us, he can't be on the hemolung much longer. You need to prepare yourself. And I looked at Dr. Bermudez, and I love this man. He is so wonderful. And everyone is intimidated by him but me. And I said, I will never be prepared for that, Dr. Bermudez. And he smiled, and he laughed, and he said, I know, I shouldn't have said that. And that night at 1 a.m., I got a call for lungs. They actually ask you have to say yes or no. Yeah, they actually ask you if you want them. He didn't get a say this time. And I said, yes, we want them. So we gathered around him.
I'm saved again. I have lungs. I'm breathing again. Let's give a hand clap to God for praise for this. Thank you, Jesus. I don't know what the next picture is. Let's look at it. Okay, this is us in the hospital, and this is just to give you a little bit of what I actually look like. You can tell I'm very skinny here. Sallie would fly back and forth from home back to Pittsburgh and spend some time, and then she would go back. Her job actually dealt with an area in Pittsburgh, which is, again, amazing. So they were allowing her to do different types of work just to kind of make up for what was going on. And we'll go to the next one.
And his mom stayed with him the entire time.
And I had this little patch here. This is where the trach had been put in. And I do have a little dimple there anyway, and that's what that is. I don't know what's the next one. Okay, and this is me after I'm off of oxygen. So I was on oxygen during recovery for quite a while. And recovery in Pittsburgh was where it started for me. And it was
He was awake.
It was horrendous. I was awake. You know, usually when you're sleeping through all this, it's great. You're on, you're sedated and you've got a ton of medicine. But when you wake up, it is horrible. So recovery was very tough. I was in the hospital for 5 months, and this is after the transplant. I was in recovery, and it was not guaranteed that I would even live. They just really worked very diligently to keep me alive. And God did, every day he did a miracle. He did things that I can't really, there's not enough time to tell what he did. But I'm here because he did something every day.
I believe that God blessed us with great medical care, with great nurses. His mom and I were both there all the time. This is him at the nurses' station. I made him walk there all the time when I wasn't there. His mom was the mean one and made him walk there all the time.
We'll go to the next one. So the last month we were in a hotel instead of the hospital, but we could not leave. We stayed a month in a hotel. This is my brother-in-law. That is her brother. And he came to visit, and we would go back and forth to the hospital for checkups. I was building muscle, I was building strength and endurance, but I was extremely weak. And it took a very long time for me to be comfortable enough to walk. In fact, even when I got home at the end of August, I still was so uncomfortable with walking that I had to have people at the house just to make sure I wouldn't fall over. And honestly, that is the end of the transplant stories. that isn't the end of the story in general, but it is the end of the lung transplant stories. I went home on dialysis for 2 years. This was 2014, so up till 2016, I was on dialysis for 2 years, and God worked it out for me to get a kidney transplant. I've had 3 transplants. I mean, that is a miracle. It is amazing. I never really had to wait on the list. I know people who have waited on the list, and they've died. Don't ask me to explain that part. I don't get it. Why in the world I'm still here, I have no clue. I just know one thing. It's for the glory of God. I know that. I'd like to give it, yeah.